I used to think emotional dependence was just another way of saying love, that if you leaned on someone hard enough, it meant you trusted them. That was me with Evan. I leaned on him for everything: decisions, reassurance, validation, comfort. If something good happened, he was the first person I texted. If something bad happened, I waited to hear his voice before I let myself feel it. I didn't realize how unbalanced it was, because it felt safe. He felt safe. We met 3 years ago at a friend's birthday thing at a brewery downtown, one of those places with concrete floors, long wooden tables, and string lights that made everything look warmer than it really was. I wasn't even supposed to go. I almost bailed last minute because I was tired and insecure and convinced no one would notice if I didn't show. Evan noticed. He noticed me standing awkwardly near the bar, pretending to study the tap list like it was a menu I'd need to be tested on. He asked what I was drinking, then admitted he didn't know anything about beer either, and usually just ordered whatever had the coolest name. That honesty hooked me. There was no performance, no trying too hard. He was tall, but not intimidating, confident without being loud. When he laughed, it wasn't polished. It came out fast and messy, like he didn't bother controlling it. I remember thinking, I could breathe around this guy. We started dating fast. Not in a reckless way, but in that steady, sliding into place way, where suddenly he was sleeping over most nights, and his toothbrush appeared in my bathroom without a conversation, and my friends referred to him as your boyfriend before I'd even decided that label out loud. He worked in tech support for a mid-sized company. I worked remotely in marketing. Our schedules lined up almost too perfectly. Lunch breaks together, long walks in the evening, cooking dinner side by side while music played from his phone on the counter. At some point, without noticing, I let him become the center of my emotional gravity. If I had a bad call with a client, I needed to talk to him about it before I could shake it off. If my mom said something passive-aggressive on the phone, I replayed it to Evan like evidence, waiting for him to tell me I wasn't crazy. When I felt unsure about myself, about my body, my career, my future, I looked to him to stabilize me. And he did. Always calm, always reassuring, always there. People say that kind of closeness is dangerous, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like finally finding someone who could hold the weight. He liked being needed. I can see that now. At the time, it just felt like compatibility. We moved in together after a year, a 2-bedroom apartment in a quiet complex not far from the freeway. Beige walls, thin carpet, neighbors we nodded to but never learned the names of. It wasn't exciting, but it was ours. We bought cheap furniture together, argued mildly over throw pillows, joked about how our lives were becoming aggressively adult. I told myself this was what stability looked like. There were small things I ignored because they didn't fit the story I had already decided was true. Evan was protective of his phone in a casual way, not hiding it exactly, but always face down, always within reach. If a notification popped up while we were watching something, he'd glance at it quickly, then tuck the phone away like it was nothing. I noticed, but I didn't question it. Everyone deserves privacy, I told myself. Trust means not looking. He also had these gaps in his schedule that never quite added up. Late work nights that didn't seem urgent. Weekend errands that took longer than expected. He always had an explanation, delivered smoothly, without defensiveness. I never felt like he was lying. I felt like I was being taken care of. That's the thing that messes with me the most now. How gentle he was. How steady. He held me when I cried over things that had nothing to do with him. He remembered details about my childhood, my fears, my habits. He brought me coffee in bed when I had early meetings. He listened. He showed up. And because of that, I never imagined there could be an entire part of his life I wasn't seeing. Emotionally, I was exposed with him in a way I'd never been with anyone else. I told him things I didn't even tell my closest friends. My anxiety spirals, the nights I couldn't sleep because my brain wouldn't shut up, the way I sometimes felt like I was faking adulthood and everyone else had a manual I missed. He became the place I put all of that, every worry, every doubt. He absorbed it without complaint. I didn't realize that while I was emptying myself into him, he was keeping something sealed off. The first real crack came from something stupid, a shared calendar. We had started syncing our schedules because it made life easier. Groceries, dinners, birthdays, work travel. One night I was adding a reminder for my sister's visit when I noticed an event already there, marked private, just a gray block with no details. I hovered over it longer than I needed to. It was on a Saturday afternoon. No explanation. I scrolled back. There were others. Always private. Always fake time blocks. When I asked him about it, I kept my tone light. Casual, like it didn't matter. "Oh, those," he said, barely looking up from his laptop. "Just stuff I forget to label. Work things, random appointments." That should have been enough. It almost was. But something in the way he said it, how quickly he dismissed it, stuck with me. I told myself I was being paranoid. I didn't push. After that, though, I started noticing more. His mood shifts, how sometimes he seemed distracted, distant, like part of him was somewhere else. How he'd go quiet after checking his phone, then snap back into our conversation like flipping a switch. I started feeling this low-level hum of anxiety that I couldn't explain. Not suspicion exactly, more like disorientation, like the ground under me wasn't as solid as I thought. I didn't talk about it. That's another thing I regret. I kept it to myself because Evan was my emotional anchor. Admitting that I felt uneasy about him felt like pulling at the only thing holding me steady. So instead, I doubled down, needed him more, sought more reassurance, wrapped myself tighter around the version of us I believed in. There was a night not long after when he came home late, smelling like a bar I didn't recognize. I remember sitting on the couch, TV on but muted, lights low. I asked how his night was. He said, "Long," and kissed my forehead like everything was normal. I let it go. That was the pattern. Me letting things go. Me trusting the feeling of safety over the evidence of my own eyes. I didn't know yet that the life I was depending on was only half the picture. I didn't know that while I was building my emotional world around him, he was living in another one that didn't include me at all. The thing about discovering a hidden life is that it almost never happens in a dramatic explosion. No sirens, no confession, no moment where everything lines up cleanly. It comes in pieces, out of order, like your brain is handed a puzzle with half the edges missing and told to make sense of it anyway. For me, it started with a name I didn't recognize. I was folding laundry on the Sunday afternoon, one of those quiet days that feel suspended in time. Evan was in the shower.
His phone was on the coffee table, screen lighting up every few minutes with notifications. I wasn't trying to snoop. I didn't pick it up, I didn't unlock it. I just glanced over when it buzzed again and again, the way anyone would. Same name each time. Lauren. No last name. Just Lauren. The messages stacked on top of each other until the preview cut off. I looked away immediately, like I'd touched something hot. My chest tightened, but my mind rushed in to calm it down. Coworker, old friend, group chat breaking off. A million explanations that didn't require the one I was afraid of. When Evan came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, hair damp, I acted normal. Too normal. Smiled too fast. Asked him if he wanted help making dinner. My heart was racing so hard I could hear it in my ears, but he didn't notice, or maybe he did and chose not to. That night, after we went to bed, I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling. His breathing evened out quickly, like it always did. He could fall asleep anywhere, anytime. I envied that. My brain wouldn't stop replaying the name, Lauren, over and over, like if I said it enough times, it would lose its power. I didn't ask him about it the next day, or the day after. Instead, I started paying attention in a way I never had before. Not obsessively, quietly, like someone who didn't want to know but couldn't stop themselves from noticing. Lauren showed up more, not constantly but consistently. Texts that made him smile before he caught himself. Messages he replied to quickly, then slipped the phone back into his pocket. I told myself I was imagining the smile, that I was projecting my fear onto his face. I hated myself for even thinking it. I tried to ground myself in the version of Evan I knew, the one who made me tea when my stomach hurt, the one who rubbed my back when I was anxious, the one who told me I was his person, that someone like that wouldn't betray me. That emotional closeness meant honesty. But there were nights he felt farther away, even when we were sitting on the same couch. He'd laugh at my jokes a beat too late. He'd answer questions with less detail. He was still there, but something had shifted, like his attention was divided by something I couldn't see. The worst part was how alone I felt with it. Evan was the person I normally would have gone to with this kind of anxiety. I would have said, "Hey, I'm feeling weird and I don't know why," and he would have talked me down. But this time, he was the source of the feeling, so I carried it by myself, let it sit in my chest, heavy and unnamed. The first time I tried to bring it up, I backed out halfway through. We were in the car, driving back from the grocery store. The radio was low, traffic slow. I said, "Can I ask you something kind of stupid?" He glanced at me, relaxed, open. "Always." I felt my throat close. "Never mind," I said. "It's nothing." He reached over and squeezed my knee. "You okay?" I nodded. "Yeah, just tired." And that was that. Another missed moment. Another chance I didn't take because I was afraid of what the answer might do to me. A week later, I came home early from running errands because I forgot my wallet. I unlocked the door quietly, not thinking anything of it. Evan was in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to his ear. His voice dropped when he heard me come in. "I'll call you later," he said quickly, then hung up. He stood up too fast, smiled too wide. "Hey," he said, "you're back already." "Forgot my wallet," I said. My voice sounded distant, like it wasn't coming from me. "Who were you on the phone with?" I asked, trying to keep it casual, hating myself for how careful I sounded. He didn't hesitate. "My sister." He has a sister. That part was true. But something in the way he answered felt rehearsed, like he'd been waiting to use that line. My stomach sank. Later that night, I sat on the bathroom floor, pretending to scroll through my phone while he brushed his teeth. I felt stupid and dramatic and unhinged. I wanted proof so I could either confront him or let it go. I wanted something solid. Instead, all I had was a growing sense that I didn't know the person sleeping next to me. The proof came when I wasn't even looking for it. I was on his laptop one afternoon, ordering takeout because my phone had died. We shared the computer sometimes. He'd never told me not to use it. His email was logged in. I didn't plan to look. I really didn't. But a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. "Can't stop thinking about last night." From Lauren. My hands went cold. I stared at the words until they blurred. I could have closed the tab, pretended I didn't see it, protected myself from what I knew was about to happen. Instead, I clicked. What I found wasn't just flirting. It wasn't ambiguous. It was a full conversation that went back months. Plans, memories, jokes I didn't understand, complaints about how complicated things are right now, messages about missing each other, about sneaking time together, about how careful they had to be. Careful. I scrolled until my fingers shook. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't emotional cheating that accidentally crossed a line. This was a parallel relationship, a second life carefully folded into the spaces of ours. A woman who knew he was taken and stayed anyway. A man who came home to me and still had the capacity to build something intimate with someone else. I didn't cry at first. I felt hollow, like someone had reached into my chest and scooped everything out, leaving nothing but air. All I could think was, how long have I been sharing my life with a stranger? When Evan came home that evening, I was sitting on the couch with his laptop closed beside me. I didn't yell, I didn't throw anything. I just asked, "Who is Lauren?" The look on his face told me everything before he said a word. The color drained. His mouth opened, then closed. He sat down slowly, like his legs had given out. "It's not what you think," he said, because of course he did. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was surreal. "I read the messages," I said. "So unless I imagined all of that, it's exactly what I think." He ran his hands through his hair, wouldn't look at me. "I didn't mean for it to happen like this. Like this. As if there was a version of betrayal that would have been acceptable." I realized in that moment that the man I depended on emotionally had been splitting himself in two, and I had only ever known the half he wanted me to see. I don't remember everything he said after that, not in a clean sequence. I remember fragments. His voice sounding smaller than I'd ever heard it. Words like confused and didn't plan this and it didn't mean I don't love you. I remember staring at a crack in the wall above the TV and thinking about how many times I dusted that spot, how ordinary it was, how surreal it felt that my life was breaking apart in the same room where we'd argued about what show to binge next. He told me Lauren wasn't supposed to be serious, that they met through mutual friends at a happy hour months ago, that it started as venting, talking, understanding each other. I almost laughed at that part. Venting, talking. Those were the same words he'd used to describe our early connection. He said she made him feel seen in a different way, that with me he felt pressure to be stable, strong, reliable, that with her he could be messy.
That hurt more than the sex would have, if I'm being honest. The idea that I was the place he went to be solid, and she was the place he went to be real. I asked him how long. He hesitated, then said, about 8 months. 8 months. I did the math without meaning to. 8 months of late nights, of private calendar blocks, of me crying on his shoulder about my insecurities, while he was actively lying to my face. 8 months of him living 2 emotional lives and letting me believe I was the only one. I asked if he loved her. He said no too fast. I asked if he slept with her. He nodded. That's when I finally cried. Not pretty tears, not quiet ones. I folded forward like my body had given up holding itself together. I felt embarrassed even in that moment, like I was performing grief in front of the person who caused it. Evan reached for me and I pulled away so hard my shoulder hit the arm of the couch. "Don't," I said. "You don't get to do that." He looked genuinely shocked, like the idea that he'd lost the right to comfort me hadn't occurred to him. That realization seemed to land harder than my anger. We didn't sleep that night. I stayed on the couch. He stayed in the bedroom. The apartment felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. Every sound felt amplified. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floor, his footsteps when he went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I stared at the ceiling until the light changed outside,
and morning happened without asking permission. The next few days blurred together. We had long, circular conversations that went nowhere. He apologized a lot, said he hated himself, said he didn't want to lose me, said he'd end it with her, said he already had. I didn't know what to believe. Every word felt unstable now, like it could collapse under its own weight at any second. What messed with my head the most was how normal he still seemed. He still made coffee the way I liked it, still asked about my meetings, still laughed at things on TV. The betrayal didn't turn him into a villain. It turned him into the same man, minus the illusion, and that was harder to reconcile. I felt split in half. One part of me wanted to run, pack a bag, call a friend, blow up my life and start over somewhere I wasn't constantly reminded of what I'd missed. The other part of me clung desperately to him because he was still the person I depended on emotionally. Even now, especially now, losing him felt like losing the ground under my feet. I hated myself for that. I started questioning everything, every memory, every late night he claimed he was working, every time he told me I was overthinking something. I replayed conversations in my head, searching for clues I should have caught. It felt like my entire relationship had been built on gaps I didn't know how to see. A week after the confrontation, he told me he wanted to try therapy, couples therapy, individual therapy, anything. He said he'd do the work, that he finally understood how much he'd hurt me. I nodded, non-committal, because I didn't trust my own reactions anymore. I didn't know if agreeing meant strength or weakness. Then Lauren reached out to me. She found me on social media. I recognized her name instantly. My stomach dropped when I saw the message request. I stared at it for a long time before opening it, my thumb hovering like it might burn me. She said she was sorry, that she didn't know how deep things were between Evan and me at first, that by the time she did, she was already in too deep herself, that he told her we were basically roommates, that he was unhappy, that he felt trapped. I felt something sharp and ugly rise in my chest. Not just anger, vindication. Because of course he'd rewritten our story to make room for her. Of course he'd minimized me in her version of reality, the same way he'd minimized her in mine. I didn't respond right away. I showed Evan the message instead. His face went tight, defensive. "I told her not to contact you," he said. "That's what you're focused on?" I asked. "Not the part where you told her we were basically roommates?" He didn't answer. That silence told me more than any confession could. I finally replied to her later that night. I didn't insult her. I didn't threaten her. I just told her the truth, that we lived together, that we talked about the future, that I had no idea she existed until days ago, that whatever story he told her was incomplete at best. She didn't reply after that. Something shifted in me after that exchange, a kind of clarity I hadn't felt since before I met him. I realized how much of myself I'd handed over to Evan, how I'd let him become the filter through which I understood my own emotions, how dangerous that was. Not because loving someone is wrong, but because I'd stopped being a whole person without him. I started sleeping at a friend's place some nights, told Evan I needed space. He didn't fight it. He looked scared, which would have satisfied me once. Now it just made me tired. Being away from him felt like withdrawal. I reached for my phone constantly, wanting to tell him things, wanting his reassurance. Every time I stopped myself, it felt like ripping off a small piece of skin. But underneath that pain was something else. Anger, grief, and slowly the beginning of self-respect. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. Stay, leave, try again, walk away forever. All I knew was that the life I thought I was living wasn't real anymore, and the version of myself who depended on him for emotional stability couldn't survive what came next. Because trust, once broken like that, doesn't just crack. It rewires everything, and I was only starting to understand how deep that damage went. I thought the hardest part would be deciding whether to leave. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning how to exist without him being the place I put everything. The space I asked for turned into distance, whether I intended it or not. I stayed at my friend Melissa's place more nights than I stayed at the apartment. She had a guest room that smelled like clean laundry and candles, and a life that didn't revolve around my crisis. She never pushed me to talk. She just let me sit on her couch in silence, scrolling on my phone, untethered. That alone felt like a gift. Evan texted constantly at first, checking in, apologizing again in different words, telling me he missed me, telling me he was scared. I replied when I felt like I could do it without unraveling. Sometimes that meant hours, sometimes days. Every time my phone buzzed with his name, my body reacted before my brain did.
A rush, a drop, that old dependence trying to pull me back into orbit. When we did see each other, it was awkward in a way I wasn't prepared for. We'd sit across from each other at the kitchen table like strangers negotiating something fragile. He'd ask if I was okay. I'd shrug. He'd tell me about therapy appointments he'd scheduled, books he'd started reading, things he was realizing about himself. I listened, detached, not because I didn't care, but because something in me had shut down to protect itself. One night, after weeks of this limbo, he asked the question I knew was coming. "Do you still see a future with me?" He didn't sound desperate. He sounded genuinely uncertain, like he finally understood that this wasn't his decision alone. I stared at the wall behind him for a long time. I wanted to say yes, because it would have been easier.
Familiar, predictable. I wanted to say no because it would have been clean, brave, definitive. The truth lived somewhere in between, and that scared me more than either option. "I don't know," I said, and that's the problem. He nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting that answer. "What do you need from me?" The old version of me would have told him exactly what to do, what to say, how to fix it. I would have handed him the blueprint to my healing and waited for him to execute it perfectly. That realization hit me in that moment, sharp and undeniable. "I don't think you can give me what I need," I said quietly. "Not right now." That was the beginning of the end, even though neither of us said it out loud. Over the next month, I started pulling my life back into myself, piece by piece. I went to therapy alone. I reconnected with friends I'd slowly drifted from without noticing. I started making decisions without running them by Evan first. Small things at first. What to cook, what show to watch, when to go to bed. It felt foreign, like using muscles I hadn't exercised in years. Evan, to his credit, didn't stop trying. He showed up consistently. He respected my boundaries more than he ever had before. He answered my questions honestly, even when the answers hurt. I believe he was genuinely remorseful. I believe he was finally doing the work he should have done long before he ever met Lauren. But remorse doesn't erase reality. The reality was that when I looked at him, I didn't feel safe anymore. I felt alert, aware, like part of my brain was constantly scanning for exits. I couldn't relax into him. I couldn't lean. And without that, everything felt strained and brittle. The final moment came on an ordinary Tuesday night. No fight, no raised voices. We were sitting on the floor of the apartment, surrounded by half-packed boxes, because I'd agreed to move my things out gradually. The air felt heavy with things we hadn't said. He asked, "Is there someone else?" I shook my head immediately. "No." "Then why does it feel like you're already gone?" I thought about that for a long time. Then I said, "Because I had to leave emotionally before I could leave physically. Otherwise, I wouldn't survive it." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were wet, but he didn't cry. "I never wanted to hurt you like this." "I know," I said, and I meant it. But intention doesn't change impact. That was the first time I said it without anger, without needing him to understand, just stating it like a fact. I moved out completely the following weekend. I took the furniture that was mine, the plants I'd kept alive, the mugs I liked best. I left behind the couch we picked together, the bed where we slept through 3 years of shared mornings, the walls that held too many echoes. When I closed the door for the last time, I didn't feel relief. I felt grief, clean and deep and deserved. The weeks after were brutal in quiet ways. I reached for my phone constantly, not to text him, but to ask him things, to tell him things, to have him confirm that what I was feeling made sense. Every time I stopped myself, it felt like standing up against a strong wind. But slowly the urge softened. The silence became less threatening. I started to understand how much of my emotional world I'd outsourced, how I'd used him as a regulator instead of learning how to sit with my own discomfort, how his betrayal wasn't just about cheating. It was about the imbalance I'd helped create. That didn't excuse what he did, but it reframed what I needed to heal. Months later, I ran into him at a grocery store. It was accidental and jarring and oddly anticlimactic. We stood there with our carts between us, making small talk like people who shared a past but no longer shared a language. He looked different, lighter in some ways, more grounded. I was glad for him, genuinely. When we said goodbye, he hesitated, like he wanted to hug me. I stepped back instinctively. He caught it and nodded, accepting it without protest. That moment told me everything I needed to know about how far I'd come. I don't hate him.
I don't wish him harm. I also don't romanticize what we had anymore. I see it clearly now. The love was real. So was the damage. I'm more careful now with where I place my emotional weight. Not closed off, not hardened, just aware. I know what it feels like to give someone the power to define your inner world. I know what it costs when that person turns out to be human in the worst way. The other life he was hiding didn't just break my trust in him. It forced me to confront the parts of myself that disappeared inside the relationship. Losing him hurt. Finding myself again hurt differently. But that pain led somewhere. And for the first time in a long time, I don't feel dependent. I feel present, whole, still healing, but standing on my own ground.